So there's no real way to diagnose man's problem and to understand man and man's anthropology, as I said, without the right theology.
So Jesus says in the New Testament, he talks about his Father, and I was interested in the fact that Yahweh and Jehovah isn't mentioned in the New Testament, but Jesus talks about his Father.
Whoa. Whoa, what?
Well, in the Old Testament, the name Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord, is mentioned frequently throughout that narrative.
Sure.
And then Jesus comes on the scene, and he says his Father in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that if Yahweh's name was so important, that it would be reiterated and continued into the New Testament. So Jesus says in the New Testament, he talks about his Father, and I was interested in the fact that Yahweh and Jehovah isn't mentioned in the New Testament, but Jesus talks about his Father.
Whoa. Whoa, what?
Well, in the Old Testament, the name Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord, is mentioned frequently throughout that narrative.
Sure.
And then Jesus comes on the scene, and he says his Father in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that if Yahweh's name was so important, that it would be reiterated and continued into the New Testament.
It is. What are you talking about? Jesus is called Yahweh many times, both in the Old and the New Testament.
Well, that may be true. I'm not sure. I haven't seen
it's
any.
True. Prepare ye the way of Yahweh, right? When the Gospels talk about John the Baptist preparing the way for Yahweh, and then that's quoted in the Gospels. Who did John the Baptist prepare the way for?
Well, that was him preparing for Jesus.
Yeah, so Jesus is Yahweh. I mean, you understand that Jesus is all through the Old Testament too. So it's not just the Father in the Old Testament that's identified as Yahweh. The angel of the Lord is also identified as Yahweh. For example, Exodus 3 and Exodus 23, God says, I will put the name Yahweh in the angel. So you will refer to him as Yahweh. The angel of the Lord is Jesus. Are you not familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the Lord and then his angels and then
No.
No.
The angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, a divine theophany called Yahweh, called Jehovah, and worshipped in the Old Testament. Not an angel. Angel just means messenger. So that could be a divine messenger, it could be a human messenger. We're not talking about God's angels. I'm talking about the angel of the Lord who is called Yahweh.
Right. I was just reading, I think it's Exodus 32, where after Moses breaks the first set of tablets, and then after the golden calf, the Lord sends the Israelites to go to the promised land. He says, I will send my angel of the Lord in front of you. And then Moses kind of goes back and forth with him saying, well, you should go with us because then that would show your approval of us.
Yeah, the angel of the Lord is the same one like a son of man that Moses went up on the mountain to eat his meal with, which is a type of the Eucharist. That's okay. Jesus. Okay, that's the same one like a son of man in Ezekiel 1 all the way through Ezekiel 10, who rides the heavenly chariot. That's Jesus. So Jesus is not a creature who begins at his incarnation. Jesus is identical to the second person of the Godhead, right? The only difference is that when he became incarnate, he took on human nature. But the second person of the Godhead is who's throughout the Old Testament. That's who appears in the fiery furnace, one like a son of man amongst Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's who appears to Hagar. That's who appears to Adam and Eve. That's who appears to Joseph. That's who appears to Samson's parents, Manoah. And he's called Wonderful. Samson's parents say, who are you that I should, what is your name? Why do you ask my name, seeing as it is wonderful? What does Isaiah say? The Lord's name is wonderful.
Right. And to kind of finish this second question, in John's gospel, he says at the beginning that no one has seen or heard God. And that's difficult to comprehend.
No, it's not difficult if you believe in the Trinity, because Jesus explains this in John 5. So I would say go listen to, we lectured all the way through the Gospel of John. If you listen to the John lectures, by the time of John 5, Jesus says to the Pharisees, we all agree that no one has seen the Father at any time. And yet we know that Moses went up on the mountain and saw and talked to God face to face. In other words, Jesus is saying, Moses talked to me. And so if you read Hebrews 1, it says that the Son is the only icon of the hypostasis of the Father. So Jesus, the second person of Godhead, is the icon and image of the Father. And so in that sense, the way that everyone talked to God face to face in the Old Testament is via the angel of the Lord, aka Jesus, who appears as a theophany to all the prophets, to all the patriarchs. Right? It says, for example, that the voice came to Elijah.
Right.
That's Jesus, the Word. Moses, and Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3 that when Moses went up on the mountain, he saw Christ face to face.
Yeah.
So in other words, the Trinity and the essence-energy distinction perfectly explains the theophanies and how this is possible and how there's continuity between the Old and the New Testament. Really, throughout the Gospel of John, if you really pay attention through the Gospel of John, especially John 1 through 8 or 9, this is a constant source of debate between Jesus and the Pharisees. And so I like that you pointed out in John 1, because John is making that point. No one has seen God, the Father, at any time. But we have beheld the Son, the only begotten, who we touched, who walked around and spoke to us. So the only way
not a low resolution, because I'm not calling Jesus a low resolution, but kind of an image that we can see and comprehend, that we can strive towards.
Yeah, that's the idea of an icon. An icon is a direct reflection or image of something else, right? So like if you look in a mirror, I mean, that image of you is just like you, right? But it's not identical to you. So that's just an analogy, and that's what Hebrews 1 says the Son is the direct icon of the Father. And so there's a Trinitarian role in redemption, that the Holy Spirit points us to the Son. And the Son then directs us to the person of the Father. And that's a never-moving circle, you could say. That Trinitarian communion is a never-ending, constant Trinitarian communion based on the eternal inter-Trinitarian communion of the persons from all eternity. The Father eternally loving the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate the knowledge, the information, and the sharing.
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, those are definitely great. But you notice, and again, really good question. Notice the importance of Trinitarian theology for soteriology and for continuity. If we have the Trinity doctrine right, we're going to have the right doctrine of continuity between the Old and the New Testament. And really, Jesus constantly stresses this in the Gospel of John, because the Pharisees keep trying to trip him up on this, right? How do you say that you were present in the Old Testament? Abraham is, long dead and buried, and you say you were there with Abraham? You were not even 50 years old, right? So they're constantly trying to, and Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. In other words, Jesus is identifying himself as Yahweh. I am. Eir Asher Eir. I am that I am. Jesus is saying, I am that I am. He says it over and over in the Gospel of John. So Jesus absolutely identifies himself as Yahweh, as the divine name. And think about, we just did the Psalms, right, a couple weeks ago. And by the way, I do intend to keep doing the exposition of the Psalms, because there's so many Psalms that predict and prove Christ and the Trinity and his work and the deity of Christ. And throughout the Psalms, there's many, many, many examples where the prophesied Son is called Yahweh, is called God. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. That's Jesus speaking to the Father in the Ascension. Definitely good questions. By the way, if you're not familiar, we did do at least 2 streams on this in regard to theophanies and continuity between the Old and New Testament. So let me pull those up, because those are going to be really relevant for this topic. So the first one is Jesus God? Is God triune? We'll put that in the chat there. That's a talk we did a couple years ago. And then there's one about the Old to the New Testament. Where is that one? Bible contradictions, I think I titled it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so I'll put those in the chat too, and I'll leave those tabs up so I'll remember to put them in the Twitter Spaces chat as well after this. Nice. We got we're getting up to towards 400 in the middle of the day. That's nice. Good to see that. If you would hit like and share, remember This is open forum. You're welcome to come on, ask any questions, make any arguments that you want. You can refute me. You can destroy me. You can have the floor. The only rules are you got to make arguments. You don't have to. You can ask questions if you want to. But if you want to debate, you got to make arguments. They have to be arguments about today's topics. We're not here to debate sorcery and CIA, KGB stuff. We're here to debate atheism, Catholicism, Protestantism, Calvinism, Islam, paganism, whatever. And you have to stay on topic. And you can't do ad hominems. And you can't do fallacies. What are the other rules? And you can't talk for forever. So if you want to come make a 10-minute presentation, 15, you can do it. I don't care. I'll let you do it. But it's got to be arguments. All right, let's see who's next up. By the way, Father Deacon, welcome. You're welcome to chime in anytime you want.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me.
Paisios. What's up, Paisios? Just drinking some dirty dishwater here, some swill. Paisios, what's up?
What's going on? You hear me?
Yeah, how you doing?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I just want to talk about two things. When you reference the Trinity in the Old Testament, I think back to your debate with Trent Horn, where he said we can't really verify that Moses and Abraham understood the Trinity the way we do. Well, you know, according to tradition, Moses wrote the book of Genesis, and many of the fathers say it's the first 3 chapters of Genesis that basically lay out the Trinity perfectly.
Sure.
God, the Creator, the Father, God, let God speaking, let there be light, the Son, Spirit of the Lord, hovering above the waters, the Spirit. And I don't know, that's I feel like that's like a very basic misunderstanding.
It is.
Yeah.
No, and you're correct to hit on that. And the reason that Roman Catholics think this, and I've had a lot of arguments with Roman Catholics over this issue, is because they think that nobody knew or had any idea of the doctrine of the Trinity or an implicit belief in the Trinity until Nicaea or Athanasius lays it out, right, and makes clear arguments. But this is ridiculous, because if that's the case, then that means that the New Testament doesn't teach the Trinity. I mean, so nobody taught or believed in this until the word is used, right? It's not dependent on Tertullian's first usage of the term Trinity or whatever, right? Because the idea is there already that there's a unity in God, but there's also this angel of the Lord, and there's also the Spirit of the Lord. That's in the Old Testament in many, many, many places, right? And you're right to point to Genesis first. We have that triadic relationship early on in Genesis and throughout Genesis, right? We'll have references to the angel of the Lord in many places in Genesis. We'll have references to the Holy Spirit as well, again, as a distinct persona. So they didn't have the Greek Hellenic categories and words, but the doctrine of the Trinity isn't contingent upon using Greek categories and words. If it was, then we couldn't translate the gospel into other languages. Duh, obviously, right? I mean, this is just kind of the Roman Catholic objections are so silly and basically naive that they actually undercut Christianity itself. Because so nobody really believed in the Trinity until Athanasius fleshed it out. No, the Athanasius and Nicaea are clarifying and explicating what is already believed, you see. So it's a apostolic deposit that's already got the doctrine of the Trinity, even though it's not called the doctrine of the Trinity. The New Testament clearly teaches the Father is Son, the Father's God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit's God, and there's one God, right? And that's clearly taught in the New Testament in many, many places. But the fact that they haven't clarified it yet does not mean that they didn't believe in it. And that's the silly sort of, again, just terrible theology, perennialist natural theology presupposition that Trent has. And that's why Trent literally is telling me that, no, the Old Testament doesn't teach the Trinity. Oh, really? Good luck arguing with a Muslim, Trent. The Logos is the icon of the Father, and man is the icon of God. We are the image of God.